He wasn't supposed to be home before dusk. When Tomas Rivera pushed open the apartment door, he found his own jacket propped in a chair, the sleeves held out toward a little girl who was counting coins with the seriousness of a surgeon. "Excuse me, sir," she whispered to the empty jacket. "How much for 5 minutes of Dad? Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story." The day had wrung him out like a cloth. The factory manager's office had smelled of burnt coffee and lemon cleaner, a smell that would never leave Tomas after today. Of did you know, of unfortunately, of the paper he had to sign with a pen that clicked too loud. He'd stood under the reasonable face of a man who could afford to look reasonable and counted the places his palms were sweating. Downsizing. It wasn't his fault, the man said, as if that made the shrinking of everything else: rent, groceries, his son's soccer fees, the little birthday party he had promised his daughter, as tidy as a spreadsheet. Tomas walked home in a drizzle that slicked the sidewalks and pulled the city's colors out in long, oily streaks. He carried a paper bag with the last loaf of a day-old bakery he could still justify buying. He had intended to stop at the corner where Mrs. Delgado sold mangoes and ask about extra work lifting crates, but his feet argued with him. He kept picturing Anna's hands, the way she smoothed envelopes before she opened them, and the way her eyebrows knit together when she pretended something wasn't heavy. The building sighed around him, a tired old thing with peeling turquoise paint and a crack like a river up the stairwell. He climbed 2 flights and stood at the door marked 3B, listening. A life has a sound when it's still full and a sound when it starts to empty. Today, their apartment had the sound of both, the rattle of a spoon against a chipped bowl and the sweet hush of a radio turned low, as if trying not to wake a sleeping baby. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, ready to call out his usual "Hey, my sunshines," but stopped. On the floor, a rectangle of light lay like a soft blanket over a world arranged by smaller hands. There was a cardboard sign propped against the chair with his jacket on it, letters carefully penciled in and outlined with marker. "The Times Store," it read in a child's treble enthusiasm. Below, in smaller letters, "Buy Dad minutes here." On the coffee table, coins spread in neat circles, each labeled with sticky notes: "Bus money, lunch, for Dad." A cutout paper clock lay beside them, a brad pin fastening the hands so they could turn. And there, standing in her mismatched socks, their daughter Sol, 7 years old, serious, the tiny mole under her left eye like a period in the sentence of her face. She had a wad of dollars in one hand and was squinting at a carefully drawn price list. 1 minute, 10 cents, she read under her breath. 15 minutes, $1. Stories cost extra. Her brother Nico, lanky and bent into a question mark that had become the shape of his teenage years, sat on the floor beside her, darker hair falling over his eyes, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He looked up, alert, as if he felt the air change when their father stepped on it, but he didn't see Tomas in the shadow of the hallway. He put his finger to his lips to shush his sister's pretend customer. Sol cleared her throat. "Excuse me, sir," she said again to the jacket. "How much for 5 minutes of Dad?" "I have 4 quarters and 3 sparkly stickers." The jacket shrugged nothing back at her. Tomas's throat tightened until it was a new muscle, one he didn't know how to unclench. He had wanted to come home early to pretend he could fix something with a surprise. Now every coin on the table was an indictment. "Sol," Nico murmured, half laughing to hide something else. "Dad doesn't take stickers, that's for special bonus minutes." "Oh," Sol bit her lip, then reached into the pocket of her dress. "I have a seashell too." "The white one, the one that looks like a cloud." "Okay, yeah, Dad definitely takes seashells," Nico said kindly, as if he could grant the universe permissions his father had not. It took Tomas 2 tries to say his own name in his own house. The first time, his voice stuck. The second, it came out a little rough. Why are you 2 home already?" Nico's head snapped around, his cheeks lifting, surprise flickering to caution. Joy first, then the defense. "Papa," he breathed, and then stood at once, the coins shivering on the table. "You're early." Sol spun, the fist of dollars unfurling, and with the speed of a child who never walks when running might do, she flung herself at him. Tomas caught her and felt her storybooks ker-plunk against his chest, the ones she always insisted on carrying in her backpack, because what if it's boring somewhere and I need a book? Her hair smelled like shampoo and crayons. You can't see the Times store, she whispered, horrified and delighted. It wasn't ready yet. Nico tried to casually slide the sign off the table with his foot as if it had slid there by accident. The cardboard squeaked against the wood and betrayed him. He gave his father a look, something like please, something like none of this is your fault, something like we don't want to make you feel worse. Tomas set Saul down and she tugged his sleeve, a tiny hand, a quiet harbor. It's okay, he told them, though what did he know about okay? What's this? What are you doing? It's for your birthday, Saul said, breathless. But also for Wednesdays. But mostly for today so you can buy dinner with your time and watch me do my cartwheel. But only if you want. We were practicing, Nico said, stuffing the coins into the jar labeled for Dad as if that could stop them from being seen. He hunched his shoulders, embarrassed. It's supposed to be a little funny, like when you pretend something is for sale that isn't. Time, Tomas said, and somehow made it into 2 syllables. Do I cost that much? Saul studied the list in her hand, then flashed him a smile so bright he wondered why the lamp bothered. You're worth $1 million, she told him confidently. But we thought you can't carry $1 million in your lunchbox, so we made you small. Nico ran his hand through his hair, and for a second he was 5 again, bringing Tomas a dandelion and saying, it's a whisper flower. Blow and make a wish. Hey, don't be mad, Nico said. We were joking. We know you're tired. We just… Saul wanted a way to know how many minutes she could steal if you were stealing them from yours. They were joking. Tomas felt the joke in his bones like a bruise. He opened his mouth and closed it, opened it again to say the sentence that had been sitting under his tongue all day. I lost my job. But the words didn't come. They just sat there, heavy and metallic and stupid. He closed the door, set down the paper bag, and kept his hand on the knob. The door was not a drowning man he could steady with his palm, but at the moment it became an anchor, cold and real. I'm happy to be early, he said, forcing brightness into his chords. Let me see the store. Saul squealed, spun, and tugged him toward the sign. Okay, it isn't perfect because Nico said my 7s look like upside-down fish and the minute hand keeps falling off. But it's okay because the rule is you can use stickers. They had cut out rectangles of paper like receipts. Each one said a thing, one whole story. 2 turns of rope, 5 kisses. Nico had written in neat block letters. Saul had drawn hearts, uneven and brave. On a piece of notebook paper, a ledger of days and minutes. Monday, Dad late, 0 minutes. Tuesday, Dad ate here, 25 minutes. Wednesday, 10 minutes. Thursday, a star drawn beside the word soccer, then crossed out gently. Tomas's fingers hovered above the receipts, careful not to smear the pencil, a man afraid of breaking something with the smallest touch. Who taught you how to do this? He asked softly. Saul didn't understand the question, or maybe she did too much. We did, she said proudly. We are shopkeepers. Nico shifted from foot to foot. It was my idea, he admitted, his voice a little rough. It made her feel better. You know how when she waits. Tomas knew. Every night, the patch of living room carpet by the window flattened a little more where Saul sat with her backpack strap still on, even after the homework was done, even after the bath. He'd come home and find the imprint of her on the cushion, the shape of longing made into furniture. He'd step quietly, guilty and grateful that she still believed in his return after the late shifts, the doubles, the triple that had almost cost him himself. He glanced at the wall where the calendar hung, its boxes too small to hold the life they had crammed into them. Most days had X's. Sundays had hearts. A smiley face marked next week, Papa's birthday, so much hope in yellow ink. He pulled Saul to him again, kissed the top of her head, and met Nico's eyes over the soft black of her hair. They looked at each other like 2 men across a river that had not been there yesterday. One wanted to build a bridge, the other was still calculating how much lumber he had left. Where's your mom? Tomas asked finally. Double shift, Nico said. She said maybe she'd be home by 7, depending if Mrs. Delgado can take the last hour. You know how the bus is. She texted me. I made us mac and cheese. He jerked his chin toward the stove, where a pot simmered with a smell that could never be mistaken for his mother's Eraz Khan Palo, but had its own honest warmth. The kitchen light hummed. A fly tapped at the window like a tiny, polite apocalypse. Anna's working more, Tomas said, mindlessly opening and closing a cupboard door. It hit the frame with that faint wooden click that had marked the rhythm of their days for years. "Yeah," Nico said. He shrugged. "We're fine. Fine." The cruelest little word. There was a knock on the door. Mrs. Delgado swept in. The smell of mango and starch and hand lotion preceded her. She had been everywhere in their lives that needed a grandmother-shaped space. Today, her headscarf was tied in little blue moons. "Ay, Niño, you are home," she said to Tomas, kissing the air near his cheek. "They told me surprise, so I brought you these." She held up a Tupperware of something sugared, for your mouth when your heart is bitter. She saw the sign on the table, laughed, then stopped when she saw the way Tomas was standing. Her eyes swept his face, an old woman's understanding that reads grief the way you read a recipe you've made 1,000 times. She said quietly. "Look at that, the store that sells the only thing that matters. Did they give you the day off?" Tomas shook his head. The motion vibrated through him like someone had plucked a string inside his chest. More like they gave me all the days off. Mrs. Delgado's mouth pulled. She made a sound that was part sympathy, part the bitter humor of the poor. She set the Tupperware down and took Saul's face in her hands. "Prinsa, go wash your hands and set the table with the green plates, the ones with the chip. It will be extra lucky." When Saul scampered away, Mrs. Delgado touched Tomas's sleeve. "You tell Anna." "No," the word climbed out of him with too many sharp edges. "I wanted to tell her with, not in front of the kids. She already knows." Mrs. Delgado shrugged at his shock. "We all know we have ears, Mijo. The building has ears." It was true. The walls had passed along secrets like gossip and heat. "But listen to me. You are not the first and you won't be the last. Eat first. We will make a plan later. And you, Nico, stop pretending you are not tall enough to get that pot off the stove before it turns to paste." In the chaos of dinner, spoons clanging and Saul telling him about a science project in which she had turned a potato into a battery, which struck Tomas as painfully apt, Anna came home. The door opened. Her silhouette was proof that something good still belonged here. She smiled at the sight of him, a tired light expanding, and for a moment neither of them said a thing and said everything. "You're early," she murmured against his neck. The smell of hospital soap clung to her. The curve between her collarbone and jaw was the quietest place he knew. Tomas nodded into her hair. "So are you," he said, and they both laughed a little, the small, careful laughter of people near a tightrope. "Saul's store," Anna whispered as they separated. She lifted the cardboard sign and traced the E in time where Saul had added an extra arm and erased it, and tried again. "She made receipts," she added, rolling her eyes fondly toward their daughter. "She made everything," Nico put in. "She made me cry," Tomas said, and meant it like confession, not complaint. Anna's eyes flicked to him and softened. "Oh, Tommy." She took his hand under the table and squeezed twice, their code for "I see you," even when you don't want to be seen. When the kids were washing dishes and arguing over soap, their voices ricocheting off tile and laughter, Tomas said it. He said the words and watched them fly and crash into the life they'd built like birds hitting glass. "They let me go," he told her in the bedroom, the door half closed but not enough to shut out the sound of his children. "They're cutting everyone. They said it's not personal, which makes it feel worse. If it were personal, I could fix it." Anna sat on the edge of the bed. The bed springs argued faintly. They had always objected to more than 2 people sitting, as if protest was a luxury they could afford. "We knew it might happen," she said, voice even. He had always admired this about her. The steadiness that looked like simplicity until you had to keep it yourself. "I was going to pick up extra night shifts," Tomas said. "But now Anna lifted her hand. "Wait, before you build a ladder to a roof we don't have," she said gently. "There's something I need to tell you too." She pulled an envelope from the top drawer, a little creased from hiding. "I was going to tell you tonight in a not sad way," she said. "I was going to do Saul's little show and say everything right and have all our faces happy." She smiled a small, aching smile. "But here we are." She pushed the envelope into his hands. Inside, a white stick. The 2 lines were faint but there, the way dawn comes to a city too tired to notice. Tomas blinked at it as if it might tell him what to do, as if the plastic piece might be a priest. He looked at her. She had never looked more beautiful, more afraid. He loved her so much he wanted to tear something open to make space for it. "I know," she whispered, before he could say anything. "I know the math is bad." Something loosened in him. He laughed, the kind that kept you from drowning and kept the water in your mouth at the same time. The math is terrible. And yet, Anna said, covering the stick with her palm like it was a candle flame, I can already hear this one humming. Can you? Like when you put your ear to the wall and all the pipes are singing. He could. Or he made it up because love is sometimes making it up in hopes your heart will catch up to your courage. He cupped the back of her head. I'm scared, he admitted. Me too, she said. And that's why we have a building full of old ladies and mango sellers and kids with paper stores. They will keep our lights on with gossip if they have to. I can't be gone anymore, he said. It fell out of him, raw and surprising. I can't sell minutes of myself and pretend that's not what I'm doing. She nodded, and then smiled the smile that had gotten him to promise her 100 impossible things when they were 19, and the world hadn't shouted at them yet. Then don't, she answered simply. Come home too early, on purpose. Let them see you, let me see you. They sat for a while, counting the seconds like they were money and then letting them go because what else could they do? When they emerged to the living room, Saul had built a fort of blankets draped over chairs. Nico had strung a strand of fairy lights he'd found in a box marked Christmas. And the room had transformed into a circus tent with a basketball hoop stuck to the air where a trapeze might have been. The Time Store sign hung at the entrance like a marquee. Ladies and gentlemen, Nico announced in a low carnival barker's voice, welcome to the premiere of 1,000 Small Minutes, starring Saul the Brave and the amazing price list. He bowed, and his hair fell over his face, and Tomas's heart took a picture of him to keep. Saul had drawn a mustache on with eyeliner and stuck a hat sideways on her head and looked like a small, determined pirate. She stood in front of her father and mother and performed her store. She held up receipts and made jokes that were not exactly jokes and spun like a top when she thought the audience was sad. When minutes are tired, she said solemnly, you put them in your pocket and they go to sleep like this. She demonstrated. And when they wake up, you can have them again. See, she pulled her hand out of her pocket with a flourish and uncurled her fingers slowly. A firefly. Where did she get a firefly? But no, just a bit of glass, catching light like it had decided to be magic for the night. Encore, Mrs. Delgado shouted from the doorway, and everybody clapped. They ate mango pieces with sugared edges and mac and cheese and drank water like it was champagne and nobody was starving here. Not tonight. And when the building's old heart thunked into a power outage a few minutes after 8, when the lights blinked and went out in a long surrender, and the city outside hissed in the rain, the apartment glowed with 100 cheap candles that appeared from nowhere. Tomas set them on saucers and overturned jar lids. Shadows trembled up the walls. In the dark, he reached for Nico and pulled him close by the back of his neck like he hadn't in years. Nico went stiff and then soft, and for a second, he was 5 again. I'm sorry, Tomas said into the hair he used to buzz himself. It was not a speech, it was more like a prayer. For what? Nico asked, afraid of the list. For missing, Tomas answered. Nico didn't say it's okay because it wasn't. He didn't say nothing because that would be its own lie. He said into his father's shoulder, you're here now, and it was almost enough. That night, when the kids had fallen asleep under the blanket tent, and the candles had burned down to puddles of wax shaped like countries they'd never visit, Tomas took the Time Store sign off its tape and laid it flat on the table. He smoothed it with his palms. The cardboard had a scar where Saul had retraced a letter too hard. The pricing looked funnier in the candlelight. 10 cents a minute. It made his throat ache. He was tired of his time being cheap to other people. He was tired of being a number in someone else's ledger. Anna, he whispered, what if I tried something else? Like what? He thought of Sunday mornings when he'd make arepas on the tiny cast iron pan his mother had given him before she went home to a country that never felt entirely hers. He thought of the men on the corner who ate them gratefully and said, Hermano, this tastes like the place I was born in. He thought of how his hands had always known to shape dough circles even when his heart didn't know where to put itself. Like selling food, he said. From here, or a cart, Mrs. Delgado could help. The building permits are a pain, but maybe I can try. Anna lifted her head from the couch cushion and looked at him as if he had said he could pluck the moon. You'll be home, she said quietly. I'll be here when they come back from school, he said. The thought cracked something open in him and let light in. I'll be here to say eat your apples and where's your homework and show me your cartwheel. And you'll make arepas that taste like Sunday, she said, her voice daring to play like a child's. Yes, he said, I'll make Sundays on Tuesdays. She laughed softly. Then do it, we'll do it. And if it fails, we'll tell Saul it was an art project about a failed economy. It will be a science project, he grinned, about burning things and learning how not to. In the weeks that followed, their apartment did smell like burning, and flour floated in the sunlight like little prayer flags. They bought secondhand mixing bowls and a griddle on Marketplace from a man who used to sell hot dogs at the stadium and now worked at call center and never went to games, only listened to the roar and pretended. They filled out forms that made them feel like they were folding themselves into envelopes never meant to hold that much hope. They bribed the landlord with 3 empanadas and a promise. They argued about recipes the way some people argue about politics. Nico designed a menu on Anna's old laptop. Saul drew pictures of arepas with smiley faces and named each one Rosalinda with avocado, Cometa with black beans, Moonbeam with queso. The first day they set up their wobbly folding table on the corner near the bus stop. It rained. No one stopped, not even Mrs. Delgado, who finally came down at noon with a purse full of quarters and bought 4 and a hug. The second day, a construction worker with a glow-in-the-dark vest stopped and bought 1, and then came back half an hour later with friends who said with their mouths full, "Que rico," and wiped their hands on napkins like they had found the reason to keep going. The third day, a woman in a pantsuit with careful hands took a picture and put it on the neighborhood page with a caption that made no mention of charity. She wrote what mattered. These are the best arepas at the best little stand, and they're here every morning when the sun is nice. Once, Tomas would have gone to the factory cafeteria at dawn and mopped up spills and counted the minutes until his break. Now he rose in the half-light and fried eggs that sizzled and popped like applause. He sang to the dough, his mother's song, the one about having just enough. And he learned how to be a different kind of tired, the kind that comes from building something that keeps growing into the space you make for it. Sometimes, the math was still bad. They had to choose between new shoes and better cheese. The landlord knocked in a rhythm no one could mistake for opportunity. There were nights when Tomas counted dollar bills at the table and felt as broke as he'd ever been. But then he would look up and see the Time Store sign pinned to the wall beside the calendar, and Nico would place a seashell on the table, and Saul would set a sticker beside it, and Anna would touch his wrist twice and say, "We are rich in the only currency that stays." He came home early now every day. He came home before Saul's 10 minutes turned into zeros. He came home before Nico's sarcasm hardened into something colder. He came home before Anna's smile had to be plastered on. On Saturdays, their corner became a party they threw dawn after dawn. Saul wore her hat and took orders with a seriousness that made strangers grin. "What would you like to buy with your minutes?" She'd ask a banker with shiny shoes, and he'd answer, "Something with cilantro," like he understood the question but wasn't willing to say yes out loud yet. Sometimes, Tomas still went to the interviews, PTA meetings in church basements where men in suits talked about what men with hairnets should do to be better men with hairnets. He put his name down on lists. He took a night shift driving for an app for a week, and then decided he wanted to sleep under his own roof, with the sound of his children breathing down the hall like proof. One evening, he came home early on purpose to find Saul practicing sign language in front of a YouTube video on the old laptop, her hands like little fish trying to leap out of a bowl. She saw him watching and blushed. "Mrs. Delgado's niece is teaching me," she said. "It's like learning to talk with butterflies." "What for?" he asked, amused and curious. She shrugged like it was nothing, but her eyes shone. "In case someday you want to talk with your hands when words are tired." He sat beside her and copied the gestures badly, and she giggled, and he learned to say love and sorry and stay and home with his fingers. He learned the shapes of his own heart. On the day his birthday actually arrived, the building hummed with the rhythm of a shared secret. Mrs. Delgado tied balloons to the banister and told everyone who passed that you're invited, though there was no room for everyone, but somehow there was. The neighbors they barely knew brought paper plates and a bottle of something sweet. The boys from Nico's soccer team, who had figured out a way to play for free, knocked on the door and whooped and ate arepas like they were currency. Anna wore a red dress that made the day look brighter. After the cake, homemade, caved in the middle, with sprinkles like confetti thrown by a hand that didn't care about perfect, the lights dimmed. Not from a power outage this time, but because someone turned them off for effect. Saul rolled out the Time Store sign one more time. She tapped the paper clock. She held up a fistful of receipts. She cleared her throat. Today, she announced, we buy Dad for the whole day, and also tomorrow, and also the day after. How much does that cost? Someone teased gently from the doorway. $1 million, Saul said, and then giggled and spread her hands. But we have $1 million. Look. She opened her arms, and everyone laughed, and everyone knew what she meant. The room shimmered with it. Nico stepped forward, taller now by 2 months and 1,000 minutes, and handed Tomas a folded piece of notebook paper. Inside, a list titled Reasons to Stay, written in his blocky handwriting. Your jokes are worse than mine. Saul needs to show you her cartwheel again because she can do it without bending her head now. You make arepas that taste like sundaes even on Tuesdays. Mom laughs when you burn the first one and swear in the nice way. If you come home early, I can ask you stuff, like dumb stuff, and you won't make it dumb by acting busy. I'm scared sometimes too, and when you are here it's like music behind a door that someone forgot to close. Tomas read it twice because the first time his eyes filled. He folded it back around his heart like it was bandage and blessing. He put his hand on Nico's head, and then, unable not to, on Saul's, and then he reached for Anna and pulled them all in until the 4 of them were one shape. In the months that followed, there were new emergencies and old ones that refused to leave. The baby came on a Sunday morning when the first snow of the season pinned itself to the windows, and the city made a different kind of hush. Anna labored leaning on the edge of the kitchen counter, refusing to go to the hospital until the last possible moment because Saul had a math test on Monday, and she wanted to be home to quiz her. When they finally went, the neighbor's nephew drove like a man who had been waiting his whole life for this exact errand. Tomas was there. He had been there all along now, because he made a promise to himself after the day of the Time Store sign, and he had kept it with a stubbornness that surprised even him. He held Anna's hand so tight he thought he might leave fingerprints on her bones. He told her how brave she was in Spanish and English, and with the sign for brave that Saul had taught him. He watched the world narrow and then widen again as their child slipped into it, purple and angry and perfect. She was loud. Good, the nurse said. That's a good sound. Tomas cried and laughed and wiped his face on his sleeve and whispered into his daughter's wet hair a vow he did not need words for. He had already written it on cardboard months ago. He had already started to live it. He came home early that day and every day he could after, not because a manager told him to leave, but because he wanted to arrive. He learned the secret magic. If you show up before the table is set, you get to set it. You get to choose the green plates with the chip. You get to be the person your children run to with receipts that say 5 kisses. Sometimes, late at night, when the baby had finally surrendered to sleep, and the apartment's old lungs breathed, and the building's radiator clangs sounded like someone dropping tools in a workshop, Tomas would take the Time Store sign off the wall and lay it on the table. He traced the outlines of Saul's uneven letters and the section where Nico had added a little colon to make a smiley face out of the O. He kept the sign folded in his wallet for a while too, not because he needed reminding. He was never forgetting again, but because he liked the ridiculousness of it. He liked the feel of the cardboard against his thigh when he walked, the way it poked him in the grocery line and in the doctor's office and at the bus stop. He liked the way it made him remember his daughter asking an empty jacket for 5 minutes. One afternoon, months later, he saw a man at the bus stop holding a briefcase too tight, staring at a middle distance like it had insulted him. Tomas recognized the look. He had worn it. He walked over and offered an arepa. The man blinked, surprised, then shook his head like no was a reflex too trained to fight. It's on the house, Tomas said. He held out the food like an apology he wanted to make to the younger version of himself and all the men who had sold their minutes for too cheap. Our best one, you look hungry. The man took it and then took a bite and then closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was a little less panic in the edges. How much? He asked, voice low. We don't do money for first ones, Saul piped up from beside the table, her eyebrows fierce. First ones you pay with a story. Where are you going? Where did you come from? The man smiled despite himself. He told them. It was a long story and a small one, and it did not fix anything, but when he finished, he looked less alone. As for the time store, Saul left it open, always, even when she took down the sign. It existed now in the way Nico stopped playing his video game when his father sat on the couch and said, "Tell me about your day," as if it were a serious subject. It existed in the way Anna looked at Tomas when he walked in the door before the evening squeezed itself into deadlines. It existed in the smell of arepas, reminding the building that Sundays were a flavor you could summon, not just a square on a page. He had come home early once because the world had pushed him out of a place he thought he needed. He kept coming home early because he had found a place that needed him more. And every time he pushed open the apartment door, even when he had a bruise on his arm from a dropped tray or flour in his beard or fear in his throat, he heard Saul's voice in his head asking his jacket, "Excuse me, sir, how much for 5 minutes of Dad?" And he answered, out loud sometimes, enough to make his children laugh, "This minute is free. Every minute after it is mine to give." If your heart broke a little when he saw the sign the first time, if you wanted to reach into the page and take the coins out of the jar and tip the whole thing over and tell the children never to count minutes again, then you already know the last line. It is not that the world got easier. It is that he learned to hold the hard parts with both hands and keep walking toward the light. He came home early, and he made a life around that decision that was big enough to hold 1,000 little minutes and a few more. Some nights, when the baby's breath rattled like a tiny train and the city's neon heartbeat blinked through the blinds, Tomas stood at the window and looked down at the corner where their table had stood that day in the rain. He could see it in memory, the drips from the awning, the way his hands hesitated and then didn't. He thought of all the stores that sold things and all the ones that didn't. He thought of a cardboard sign with uncertain letters and the way it had opened a door he hadn't known was closed. He turned from the window and crossed the living room. He sat. He waited. He did not make the children buy him. He gave himself away, minute by minute, in the only economy that has ever worked, the one where love is legal tender and everything worth anything is paid for in time.